Hello, I'm your host, Efi Pylarinou, and today I'm delighted to have Dr. Peter Evans with us. He is the Chief Strategy Officer of McFadden Digital. He has devoted his career in identifying and articulating for all of us, for the world, significant new trends, including the experience platforms. He is the co-chair of the MIT Platform Strategy Summit and the Network Summit in Barcelona. He is a lifetime member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is a celebrated instructor academic. He's teaching at Caltech Executive Education, and also he's a visiting instructor at Dartmouth College teaching platform strategy. And we are both teaching at the Fast Future Executive Program. Peter's topic is platform businesses, and mine, you know, is fintech, finance, and money. And I have reached out to Peter following his recent visit to China, where he spoke at the annual Digital Economy Conference in China. And we're here to discuss the rise of a new innovative or emerging business model, and I'm very excited. I'd like to welcome you, Peter, and thank you for joining us from beautiful Colorado.
Yes, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be with you and to be able to connect between Greece and Colorado. It's quite terrific.
It is quite terrific. You know, we in the world of fintech and techfin talk a lot about super app models. We look to the East because it is an innovative model. And we credit China and the East for this business model innovation. And there's an obsession in the West to replicate it or, you know, somehow imitate it. There's the, what I like to call the wannabe super app companies of the West. But today we want to talk more about the latest, what you're seeing. Tell us, first of all, about this annual Digital Economy Conference. What is it all about?
So it's hosted by the Lohan Academy, which is a think tank established by Alibaba back in 2018. And of course, during COVID, it was virtual, not in person. So this was the first in-person meeting since COVID. So it gathers, it's invitation only, but it gathers together leading thinkers that are focused on understanding the digital economy. And obviously, being hosted by Alibaba, there's a lot of emphasis on platforms. So we got to examine platforms from a variety of different angles, new technologies that are being embraced, being created, and being deployed by platforms, particularly AI. We also looked at kind of new impacts and new trends in how platforms are both causing environmental issues, but also enabling solutions. So that was the topic that I spoke on.
It's extremely interesting. I mean, I'm familiar, and most of us in fintech are familiar with the Alibaba ecosystem, let's call it. You know, they have a food delivery business that I believe is called 𝐉𝐻𝗘𝗶. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. We know Taobao, which is really a online shopping. We know Tmall, and I know there's other businesses focused on logistics. And all these businesses, I think of them as a complex ecosystem or a platform-based ecosystem. Is that the correct thinking? And what new insights have you gained during this visit around this ecosystem?
Sure. Well, the scale is phenomenal. When I was there, I visited Alibaba's headquarters, and they have a place where they show some of the current statistics, real-time statistics. And the day we were there, which was not, and it's just a normal day, I think it was a Wednesday, they had already delivered 63 million packages in one day. Is phenomenal. And then they are also deploying AI for monitoring fraud. So they also had a display showing the number of sellers that had been flagged, and a number of them had been removed from the platform that day. So that was quite interesting. So there's active monitoring of the platform. So also very interesting is that Alibaba is starting to invest in its own chip manufacturing to do the advanced, they do billions of transactions. So the volume and being able to design chips that are able to handle that. So that was quite interesting. And then another big kind of development is that they're spinning off the companies. It used to be owned by the Alibaba group, and now they're spinning those companies to be independent and separate. And then finally, I was particularly interested in learning about their e-commerce activities. China is often criticized for not paying attention and investing enough in environmental protection. But when you look at what Alibaba is doing, it's actually quite impressive. They have a specialized platform called 𝗍𝗘𝗏, and it's very large. It now has 500 million registered users. And so I was able to interview the team there and get a better understanding of what's going on and how 𝗍𝗘𝗏 is supporting kind of this idea of the circular economy.
So 𝗍𝗘𝗏, who are the clients? Is it retail or small businesses?
It's peer-to-peer. So these are people who have purchased items and are looking to resell them. And they've built up a very large community, particularly among young people in China. And it's all app-based. And so they're able to resell products to others that they're looking to either, they don't need anymore, or they're looking to generate the income from them. And there's a huge array of products that are available now through the 𝗍𝗘𝗏 platform.
So is this kind of a comparable like eBay, so to speak?
Yes, exactly. It's very similar to eBay, and it's at the similar size and scale. In 2020, when the most recent data was released on its total revenue, GMV, was about 200 billion RMB, so that's about 28 billion. And I'm told by the folks that I interviewed when I was there that this year they're expecting that to grow to 300 billion, so about $42 billion worth of transactions. So this idea that the circular economy is a little sideshow and it's small and doesn't have much scale, I think Alibaba demonstrates that no, you can actually achieve this at very large scale. And there's some really interesting dynamics that happen on the platform. So one of the things that I learned from the interviews was the dispute resolution mechanism. A small percentage of the transactions, either the buyer or the seller gets into a disagreement. And what they do is they have a mechanism where they impanel a group from the community. These are not Alibaba employees. This is the community. They impanel 17 members, and they collect the information about the buyers and sellers' perspectives, and then they vote. And so through this process of engaging and enabling the community, Alibaba has been able to reduce the time of the dispute resolution to 2 hours on average.
Amazing.
So pretty amazing, yes.
Pretty amazing and very innovative and sort of involving the community, not a sort of top-down centralized the company 𝗍𝗘𝗏 whatever is deciding on this. This is pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, this goes back to one of the core principles or insights from platform strategy, which is you want to enable the community, the third parties, to create value, right? And so how do you facilitate? So that's what becomes sort of the core competency of the platform. is to enable third parties to do work for the platform that benefits the platform and benefits those parties. And so I think this is a really interesting example where, dispute resolution, if you can do it well, actually creates trust. So more participants are willing to participate, which actually empowers network effects. So we know that network effects are a very powerful way of creating value as well. And so the platform needs to focus on creating those network effects. So the more participants that join, the more value is created, which creates more incentives for others to join. And so you get this virtuous cycle. And so one of the things I'm super excited about is how do you apply these principles to the circular economy? Typically, when we hear about the circular economy, it's in the context of one company going circular. It's kind of you eat your peas. It's the right thing to do. You should do that. But from an economic standpoint, it's very difficult and actually often impractical for a single company to go circular. It's much more attractive and economically sensible to go circular together, in which you're matching different parties, right? Who may see value in the product that another party doesn't need anymore. It's reached the end of life for that other party. So very interested in the application of platforms to the circular economy. And so it was really fantastic to be able to interview the folks at Alibaba who have been in this game for quite a while. Idlefish was founded in 2014. So they have a lot of experience and they've grown the platform to truly be at huge scale. As I mentioned, 500 million members, many of which are quite active. And in fact, all the young people I talked to when I was there, yeah, of course I use that platform. It's a great way to make money, or it's a great way for me to, not send things I don't need to the landfill.
It's interesting. And are they pretty much using a similar approach with analytics and AI that you mentioned at Alibaba, where they're really monitoring and using AI to see the growth of the business, to get insights as to how they can improve the platform and add value to the users?
Well, one of the things that was super interesting, and Alibaba had an arrangement with the Asian Development Bank to do some economic research. And one of the areas they are investigating is kind of this nudge effect, right? Where you can shape the platform in certain ways to induce a certain consumer behavior. And so they were doing A/B testing. And here's a very simple one, but it illustrates the power of the platform, which is food delivery has become quite popular in China, and grocery delivery. And so what they did was they did a test in which the default in some instances was where you get the chopsticks and the knife and the fork included in your delivery automatically, versus asking the customer to specifically request those additional items. And they found that they were able to significantly reduce the amount of extra plastic that was going into food delivery just with these simple tweaks on the system. And so you can imagine you take that kind of underlying principle of thinking about nudge, and then you add AI to it. Oh my Lord, there's so many ways. And so one of the things you mentioned at the introduction, this idea of SuperApps and how Asia is quite advanced in these kind of ecosystems of services that are brought together into one application. What I've gotten interested in is why not add circular marketplaces or circular platforms to the SuperApps, right? And it just offers customers another way to get involved in the circular economy, to ensure that the products they use can go to second life, or be recycled in ways. And so there's a bunch of different ways I think that we could actually enhance and create a next generation of SuperApps that are circular. And that's a completely new topic. And the existing SuperApps actually have a long way to go to become more circular.
Yeah. And if we think of the SuperApps and the fact that it's not only individuals that are on the super apps, but we have all these businesses too through the mini programs. You can enable each business to be circular, but also within the ecosystem and the value chain that they're operating. Which
yeah, well, totally. In fact, I'm really interested in, because Europe has, the European Commission has come out with circular economy policies, but I don't see these translating into how people actually live their lives and interact, right? So what is the linkage between these very broad policy goals of driving a more circular economy for Europe? How do they get translated into things like super apps? And why doesn't Europe have, and why isn't Europe a leader in super app development that would include circularity? And then kind of who would be the orchestrator of that platform? And so given your experience in banks, very interested in like, who would be the bank that could potentially be the orchestrator of a super app, but include these circular opportunities? And then a really interesting question is, who gets credit for that? And could it be a strategy for a bank, for example, to offset its carbon emissions? And so then you get into ESG reporting, which the platforms can do extremely well. So there's a really interesting potential here to link these things that right now seem to be kind of in their own channels.
They are in their own channels, and what you said, Peter, brings to mind the fact that in China, Chinese incumbent banks were allowed to launch e-commerce businesses and e-commerce marketplaces. I believe now they're not allowed to do that anymore because of regulation, and that could have been a great use case or example if it was there, and if they could make that circularity between the bank and the e-commerce place. But we don't have that here in Europe. Actually, none of the incumbent banks are in any position to do that or have any intention. If we look at the neobanks, especially the ones out of the UK, I think the only one that could potentially do it is Revolut, because they have a lot of products and features, and they're going beyond only the strict financial services. They're integrating travel, they're trying to integrate shopping and so on. So they could do that. You know who has more potential and is going that way is Klarna. Klarna, which is started as a fintech of buy now, pay later, but really it should be seen as a shopping marketplace, right? That has innovated and designed the buy now, pay later customer experience, if you want, and now it's becoming standard everywhere, right? We see big tech, we see retail, everybody adopting it. But Klarna has taken the first move and collaborated with another fintech called Clarity AI, whose focus is to provide analytics for the energy and the carbon footprint of every item. So they've partnered with Klarna. So when you and I put something in our Klarna basket, then through the Clarity AI analytics, we can see that item, what energy consumption and what carbon footprint it has. I'm not sure that it's for every item, but they've started that collaboration.
Yeah, well, it's not just carbon. We're experiencing increasing problems with waste disposal, plastics in the ocean. So we need to have a broad perspective, not just a carbon perspective. Carbon is incredibly important, but think about all of the ways that our consumer, or what they call the linear economy, imposes on the environment. And so, right now exploring all the different platforms that exist, and I've built a database at McFadden Digital now with 80 circular marketplaces, some in the B2C space. There's a lot going on in the apparel industry,
Yes.
but also in the B2B space. And so one area that's of interest where platforms don't exist but should is maybe around recycling batteries. And we think about the growing number of batteries, especially with vehicles, which are very large batteries. Why not create a marketplace for that and do those transactions? So one of the things the banks and the payment industry potentially could come in with is payment systems that actually address the unique features of the circular, which is sometimes you need to hold the money in escrow before the parties decide, whether they agree on the quality of the recycled or the reused second life products. And so I think there is a small number of companies in the payment space that are starting to look into this, but we need kind of the enabling finance. The other side of the equation is green finance. And so one of the areas I'm looking at is a lot of green finance is going into project-based investing, like in solar farms and wind and things of that nature. But why not have green finance support marketplaces that support circularity? Because you can reduce carbon emissions. There's lots of green benefits from that. So very interested in exploring that. And in fact, I've been invited to give a presentation at the Asian Development Bank in September to talk about opportunities to invest in circular marketplaces in Asia.
Yeah, it seems to me that because the super app is really a very closed system and that is very much embedding, it's digitally native, and therefore it can really benefit. There's no silos that we have in traditional ecosystems where you have scattered, if you want, or isolated platforms. There it would be the fertile ground to do an experiment of that scale. Otherwise it won't be at scale, right?
Sure. Well, and as you point out, the super apps have big scale. So for example, Grab, the super app in Singapore has 180 million members. So this is the message I have for the circular economy community, which is if you want to have impact, think about platforms. You can imagine all the sellers on Amazon or even Zalando in Europe. You can have a very large impact with nudge, but also offering the ability to do circular. So there's a variety of ways that the platforms can be powerful mechanisms and vehicles for supporting more circular economy outcomes.
Yeah, I think also, Peter, in when thinking about banks, there are some startups. There's a bank, I think out of the UK, called the Bank of Things, that is really trying to create this marketplace secondary and have this digitally native payment experience, customer experience. And if it's digitally native from the beginning, then it would be much easier to integrate all these aspects that you mentioned. But the question, the fact is that they don't have the scale. Because as you
you're talking about the fintechs. Yeah, they don't have the scale of the big banks. But maybe we can get you said that there's some regulatory barriers. So that could be something to work on, is why can't Deutsche Bank, for example, engage? So we've seen, I don't know if you follow, but Vodafone is launching a marketplace in Spain. So here's telco, and the telcos are very interested because they're trying to move up the value chain, and they often provide the phones or the payment or the data plans for the phones. And so the phone becomes the gateway to an ecosystem potentially. And so the telcos are an interesting other party that could get into the super app game.
Peter, 5-10 years ago, most of us thought that telcos and banks would really collaborate and we would have many sort of convergencies, if you want. And the reality has been that it has not worked at all. And we don't have great successful examples. Even those that tried, for example, Orange from France, that tried that in Africa, it did not, because they have a bank, they have a telco. It has not worked. So it's an interesting observation. And probably there's studies out there to try and explain after the fact why it hasn't helped. However, on the other hand, if you look at Africa, where there's the big innovation of mobile money, right, with M-Pesa and many other companies, right, and that are enabling financial inclusion. And M-Pesa, by the way, has become over time a super app. Well, M-Pesa started 15 years ago. And by the way, the technology was designed by Huawei for them.
Oh, Huawei, okay.
Yes,
interesting.
For them. And you know, fast forward 15 years, there's many other mobile money companies, most telcos, MTN, everybody in Africa have created mobile money services, but M-Pesa has become a super app. They have everything now. So maybe M-Pesa and Africa could be the other testing ground of this circularity.
But we're also seeing the big tech companies, the big tech platforms like Apple, you know, move into the financial services space.
Yes.
And they already have a huge app stores and things, both Google and Apple, and, you know, Facebook or Meta to a lesser degree, but they could also begin to offer these. The other thing I think is something to watch. It hasn't happened yet, but Amazon has a lot of information and a huge community with Amazon Prime members. They could set up easily systems where they could do arbitrage, where they see a particular metal or something that's in high value. They just have to email their Prime members and say, hey, if you have, you know, XYZ in your house and you don't need it anymore, give it to our delivery guy and they'll pick it up for you and we'll pay you for it. Huge arbitrage opportunities, right? And unleashing. One of the things I think that what I've learned from looking at the literature and talking to people in the circular economy is we actually have a lot of material we've already mined. It's above ground. It exists in the economy. It's just not being used. It's sitting in our houses, right? There's studies that are done that show that women wear only 30 or 20% of the clothing they have in their houses. So there's a huge inventory of material out there that's above ground that could be reused. And I think the platforms could match, and Amazon is sitting in a very strong position to do the arbitrage that is necessary between unleashing that unused material and getting it to you know, industries or individuals that could use it.
The issue, I think, is that these big tech companies are really focused right now on positioning themselves, grabbing a leading market share in these advanced technologies as they evolve, and they don't have this focus that you're talking about around the circular economy.
Well, I think it hasn't been revealed yet. My understanding is, for example, Amazon's just joined the Ellen MacArthur Foundation network. And so there's some activities underway. We also have some regulations coming in that could create stronger incentives, which is, for example, extended producer responsibility laws. As I mentioned, the regulations that the EU is promulgating around circularity. So we're going to see the context. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot of innovation. I'm kind of mapping out and getting a sense of who can be the players that will orchestrate these circular platforms. Will it be the existing super apps? Will it be the existing big tech companies, or are there new actors like the Vodafones, or maybe the fintech banks that can come into this space? So I think it's kind of an open field and offers a kind of interesting new opportunity to explore how do you align your ecosystem strategy with some of these environmental constraints that are coming in, and the reality that consumer behavior is changing. You know, back 10, 15 years ago, I lived in Japan for a number of years. Buying old, used thing was unthinkable, right? But recently, Naver, which is a very large platform out of South Korea, just spent $1.2 billion buying Poshmark. Poshmark is a circular platform out of the US that had a very strong social component to buying used secondary products. So what they're seeing is that the consumer trends in Asia are changing, and young people in particular are very open to being more sustainable and having what they call once loved products.
Yeah, so what would you say is the emerging innovation in terms of this business model or trend that we should look towards to, or become aware because from the insights that you're sharing? Because you know how we humans are. Once you present us with a perspective, then we can start seeing it.
Yeah, so one of the things that's interesting, I looked at the World Economic Forum forecast for the size of the circular economy in 2030. And the estimates are that it will be about $1.5 trillion worth of value. Now, when you take the total global economy, it's not that big, but 1.5 trillion is pretty big. So there's going to be, or at least the estimates are, a pretty active, exchange and economy around circularity. The question I have is, how is that going to happen? So I've been looking at the role that platforms can provide in making that circular target achievable. And what I'm seeing is that actually we're going to see strong growth in circular platforms because they're more efficient, they're more effective. There are a variety of reasons why these are going to take off. And so the apparel industry, as you know, is under tremendous pressure because of fast fashion, the waste, really bad publicity around burning unsold items and things of that nature. They are struggling for solutions. And right now they're forming industry consortiums. The same thing is happening in packaging space. So the Unilevers, the Nestle's of the world, and Cokes, they have massive pressure on them to deal with the waste associated with packaging. And so they just huge opportunities to create platforms that would match the buyers and sellers. So I'll give you one little example that I think is pretty interesting, which is there's a corporate commitment on the part of BMW to purchase more recycled plastics in the production of their new vehicles. And so they have a deal with a Danish company that collects used fishing nets, which are a tremendous problem. They float around in the ocean and they tangle up the wildlife. So this company collects them. So it's a bilateral deal, right? It's one little startup company that collects fishing nets selling their output to BMW. It's great. They've made press releases about it, but it doesn't have scale. Imagine if you had a platform in which all the automotive industry in Europe participated in purchasing recycled plastics. You know how much demand that would create? It would create huge demand, and you would have a great marketplace. And the benefit would be that big companies want to have secure supply chains. They need liquidity in those markets. So they need a lot of sellers and a lot of buyers to create stability so that they can ensure that, yes, they can produce those products. When they produce cars, they produce tens of thousands, millions, right? And so the supply chain needs to be robust. So I think that the platforms offer an opportunity to create robust product that's circular, recycled. So plastics would be one great example. So kind of looking to the future, I think we're going to see strong growth in circular platforms, and it'll be both in the consumer, but also in the industrial B2B space as well.
What I hear from you, Peter, I'll translate it in fintech language, is we're talking about creating new liquidity pools and peer-to-peer exchanges, like in decentralized finance, and doing it another way than the way it's done now, which is there's nothing there, there's no market because there's none of these liquidity pools, and there's no orchestrator of all.
Yes, you need the orchestrator and you need the data meta layer, right? And that's why data is so valuable. And I know there's a lot of concern about data and data privacy in Europe, but let's not crush the value that data creates. And it's so important to create trust between the buyers and sellers, to understand the value proposition, to be able to properly price those goods and services. So the data layer that sits on top of these and the orchestrator, the platform, can enable that. And then you deploy AI technology to this to drive efficiencies and recommendation engines and all those kinds of things. And I think we have the capability, we have all the pieces. It just needs to be assembled, I think. And that's, to me, what's exciting. And I'm hoping and working in this area of, enabling all these pieces to come together to create platforms for good.
Peter, we could be talking for hours. You are so passionate and enthusiastic. It's contagious. I have to thank you very much for sharing your insights. A wonderful discussion today. I will share with our audience where they can follow you on LinkedIn, your work, where you share your insights and updates on your wonderful work. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you today.